The federal government spends more than $3.5 trillion every year, draining resources from the productive sector of the economy, subsidizing inefficiency and waste, facilitating corruption, and giving unearned wealth to special interests. I'm Dan Mitchell of the Cato Institute. You probably know from previous videos that I'm not a big fan of excessive government spending. But these other videos I've narrated have focused on the macroeconomic and theoretical arguments for smaller government. In this Center for Freedom and Prosperity video, we're going to switch gears and look at one specific line item from the budget, U.S. tax dollars used to subsidize the OECD. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development is an international bureaucracy based in Paris with 31 member nations, and it ostensibly represents the industrialized world, though it also has a couple of developing nations for political correctness purposes. American taxpayers finance the biggest share of the OECD's budget, paying nearly 1/4 of the bureaucracy's expenses. As you can see on the screen, the OECD is not cheap, and this means American taxpayers are sending a lot of money overseas. But this official number does not even include other expenses, such as the cost of the U.S. delegation in Paris, which is way more than $5 million. It doesn't include the expenditures of U.S. agencies to participate in OECD activities. It doesn't include assessments for special projects. And it doesn't include the capital costs, including funds for the OECD's palatial headquarters in Paris. The overall total, to be fair, is certainly far less than we spend on other international bureaucracies, most notably the United Nations, but it's still a nice chunk of change. So what are we getting for all this money? Does the OECD provide good value? The answer is emphatically no. The fundamental problem is that the OECD is a pro-big government bureaucracy that not only pursues anti-free market policies around the world, but also is constantly urging bigger government in the United States. Do you realize that the OECD has been using American tax dollars to promote a value-added tax in the United States? The adoption of this national sales tax helped finance the costly welfare state that has crippled European economic performance. Yet the OECD thinks it is a good idea for America to have a tax system more like France's. Do you realize that the OECD is pursuing an anti-tax competition project that seeks to punish low-tax jurisdictions for the horrible sin of attracting jobs and investment away from high-tax nations? I can understand why Europe's welfare states want to subsidize such a project, but why should American taxpayers foot the bill to help France and Germany create a global tax cartel, sort of an OPEC for greedy politicians? And are you happy that the OECD endorsed Keynesian spending in America, even though the so-called stimulus was a big failure? Do you know that your tax dollars were used by the OECD to advocate Obamacare-type policies for the United States? Or how about the OECD using our tax dollars to promote more federal government spending on everything from welfare to subsidies that increase unemployment? Here's something especially outrageous. The OECD is advocating Al Gore-type carbon taxes and cap-and-trade legislation, and we're paying for this nonsense. Did you know that the OECD sided with unions in a campaign against competition in the market for ocean shipping? This scheme was driven by an unholy alliance of high-tax governments, which didn't want shippers registering their vessels in nations with better policy, and unions, which prefer monopolistic national registries since they are much easier to organize. Or how about this outrage? Did you know that the OECD has sided with the United Nations and endorsed a 400% increase in America's foreign aid budget? Now, since foreign aid funds pay the very comfortable and, by the way, tax-free incomes of OECD bureaucrats, it's not surprising that the Paris-based bureaucracy is a big advocate of more foreign aid spending, but why should our tax dollars foot the bill? You'll also be delighted to know that the OECD has expressed support for global taxation, in effect endorsing the United Nations proposal for innovative financing methods, including carbon taxes, currency transaction taxes, and airline ticket taxes. If nothing else, the OECD does at least have the courage to bite the hand that feeds it. The United States is the biggest contributor to the OECD's budget, yet the bureaucracy does not hesitate to pursue policies that are contrary to America's interest. the United States government should withdraw from the Paris-based bureaucracy. To the extent there are any worthwhile activities conducted by the OECD, they easily could be handled through bilateral and multilateral negotiations. Defenders of the status quo frequently admit that the OECD has veered off in the wrong direction, but they claim that defunding the bureaucracy is akin to throwing the baby out with the bathwater. In this case, though, defunding is a protective measure, similar to pulling a plug to protect a baby from drowning. On behalf of the Center for Freedom and Prosperity, thanks for watching, and please share this video widely.